Let's begin with a difficult truth. Many women find themselves obsessing over men who barely acknowledge their worth, and it isn't always because they're weak or naive. It's because emotional unavailability can be addictive, especially when a woman's heart is chasing validation she never received in her past. See, when a man doesn't value a woman, he becomes a challenge. Not in a healthy, inspiring way, but in a psychological loop of seeking approval. She keeps asking herself, why doesn't he choose me? Why am I not enough? And suddenly, her entire sense of worth gets tied to that one man's inconsistent behavior. This is not love. This is addiction. It's a craving for emotional payoff from someone who has no intention of offering it consistently. Yet the more he pulls away, the more she wants to chase. It's the intermittent reinforcement that creates obsession. It's the same principle that keeps gamblers addicted to slot machines. A little attention here, a breadcrumb of affection there, and suddenly, she's hooked, hoping the next pull will finally give her the jackpot. But here's the tragic twist. The more she invests, the less he respects. Because the man who doesn't value her isn't drawn to her depth, her devotion, or her kindness. He's drawn to the power he has over her. And here's what every woman must know. When you fight for someone who doesn't fight for you, you are fighting against yourself. You become the villain in your own love story. So what's the way out? First, understand that obsession is a symptom, not the cause. It's a mirror reflecting your unmet needs, your wounds, and your emotional history. It's not about him. It's about something deeper inside you longing to be healed. Second, detach your self-worth from someone else's inability to love. His silence is not proof that you're unlovable. His coldness is not your fault. And third, choose your own value over the illusion of being chosen. Because the truth is, the moment a woman stops chasing validation and starts choosing peace, the obsession dies. Not overnight, but moment by moment, as she rebuilds herself with love that doesn't depend on someone else's absence or approval. You don't need a man who doesn't value you. You need your own love, fiercely and faithfully given. That's the kind of love that lasts. Obsession stems from emotional inconsistency, not love. It's a truth many people struggle to accept, because it forces them to separate the intoxicating highs of emotional connection from the reality of emotional neglect. When someone shows up inconsistently, hot one moment, cold the next, it doesn't create intimacy, it creates confusion. That confusion becomes a craving, and that craving becomes obsession. The mind becomes fixated not on the person, but on the next moment of validation, the next dose of attention, the next emotional hit. And in this cycle, the person being pursued becomes less of a partner and more of a drug. When someone expresses affection and then withdraws it, when they praise you one day and ignore you the next, your nervous system doesn't feel secure, it becomes dysregulated. Your body interprets that emotional inconsistency as a threat. And when you don't know what version of the person you'll get tomorrow, you begin to work harder for their affection. Not because they've earned your love, but because your system is desperate for stability. And what's worse is that your brain mistakes this chase for intimacy. You feel deeply connected, but in reality, you're just deeply anxious. People often confuse these highs and lows with passion. They'll say, "We have such a strong connection," or "I've never felt this way before." But what they're really feeling is the addictive cycle of intermittent reinforcement. It's the same psychological principle used in gambling. Slot machines don't reward every time. They reward just enough to keep you hooked. The unpredictability of the reward creates a rush that's stronger than a consistent payout ever could. And that's exactly what happens in emotionally inconsistent relationships. A compliment after days of silence, a sweet text after a week of distance, a breadcrumb of warmth after an emotional freeze, it feels euphoric. But only because you were starved beforehand. This kind of dynamic makes you feel like you need to earn love. It teaches you that love is not something given freely, but something you must prove yourself worthy of, again and again. And the person who is inconsistent becomes the judge of your worth. You begin to think that if you could just be better, prettier, quieter, smarter, more agreeable, they would finally stay. but they won't. Not because you aren't enough, but because they never intended to offer emotional safety in the first place. Their inconsistency isn't accidental. It may not always be conscious, but it's patterned. It allows them to remain in control, to maintain power. Because as long as you're chasing their affection, they never have to meet you where you are. They never have to grow, open up, or give back. They just have to keep you hooked on the possibility of love. The worst part is that obsession feels real. It consumes your thoughts. It shows up in your dreams. It affects your appetite, your sleep, your self-esteem. You think about what you did wrong, what you said, how you can fix it. And all of this only deepens the illusion that this is love. But real love doesn't come with this kind of instability. Real love feels calm, secure, and mutual. It doesn't create anxiety, it soothes it. Love that is real and grounded doesn't keep you guessing, it invites you in. So when you find yourself obsessing over someone who is emotionally inconsistent, pause and ask yourself, are you in love with them, or with the hope that one day they will finally choose you? More often than not, the obsession is rooted in hope, not reality. And that hope feeds off of every inconsistent gesture they offer, every small moment that feels like proof that maybe, just maybe, they care. But love isn't supposed to be proven in scraps. And no one who truly values you will keep you on an emotional roller coaster. That's not love. That's emotional survival masked as desire. Chasing validation from emotionally unavailable men is often rooted in unresolved wounds that go much deeper than the current relationship. When a woman finds herself repeatedly drawn to men who withhold affection, ignore her emotional needs, or offer inconsistent love, it's rarely about the man himself. It's about the emotional blueprint she's been carrying for years, sometimes since childhood. These patterns don't form overnight. They are often the result of early experiences with love, attachment, and self-worth that left gaps in her emotional development. When love was conditional growing up, offered only when she performed well, behaved perfectly, or suppressed her needs, she internalized a message, love must be earned. And so she grows up believing that love comes only after sacrifice, silence, and self-betrayal. Emotionally unavailable men seem to trigger those buried beliefs. They mirror the inconsistency and emotional distance she once experienced from a caregiver or significant figure. This familiarity, while painful, feels like home. It's not that she wants the pain. It's that her nervous system has been trained to associate love with anxiety, longing, and proving herself. So when a man doesn't answer texts, doesn't open up, or doesn't make her a priority, she doesn't walk away, she tries harder. She believes if she can just be good enough, patient enough, supportive enough, he'll finally give her what she needs. But what she's really doing is trying to rewrite the ending to a story that started long before he entered her life. This need for validation isn't about ego. It's about survival. It's about soothing an old emotional injury by winning the affection of someone who replicates the original wound. She may not be consciously aware of it, but her mind believes that if she can get love from someone who is hard to love, it will finally mean she is worthy. So she stays. She tolerates mixed signals, emotional neglect, even disrespect, all in the hope that it will eventually lead to the one thing she's always wanted, being chosen, not by him, but by someone who reflects the people in her past who didn't know how to choose her. It's not a conscious decision, it's an emotional reflex. It's the little girl inside her still waiting for someone to come back, say sorry, and love her the right way. What makes this cycle even more complicated is that it's self-reinforcing. The more she chases, the more emotionally unavailable he becomes, and the more her inner wounds are activated. She interprets his distance as a sign that she is failing, not as evidence of his inability to connect. She internalizes his rejection and begins to feel even less worthy, which only deepens her need to prove herself. It becomes a spiral, one that leads her further and further away from herself. She may even begin to define her value based on his attention. If he responds, she feels momentarily validated. If he pulls away, she feels worthless. Her emotions are no longer grounded in her own truth but are instead dictated by the moods and behaviors of someone who cannot offer consistent love. This isn't weakness, it's trauma. And until those emotional wounds are acknowledged and healed, she will keep choosing men who keep her in a state of longing. Not because she enjoys the pain, but because the pain is familiar, and the familiar feels safe. Even when it hurts, it feels safer than the unknown of healthy, reciprocal love. To break this cycle, the focus can't be on the man. It must be on the self. On recognizing where the pattern started and learning how to give herself the validation she keeps trying to earn from someone else. Because true healing begins the moment she realizes she doesn't need to chase love, she needs to come home to herself. Intermittent reinforcement creates addictive behavior because it taps into one of the most powerful mechanisms in the human brain, the unpredictability of reward. Unlike consistent reinforcement, where actions yield predictable outcomes, intermittent reinforcement offers sporadic, inconsistent feedback, sometimes positive, sometimes nothing at all. This unpredictability creates a psychological loop that is not only hard to break but actually increases the emotional investment of the person on the receiving end. The human brain is wired to seek patterns and meaning, and when rewards are given unpredictably, the brain becomes hyper-focused on identifying what actions will trigger a positive response. This heightened attention and anticipation create a stronger emotional connection, not to the reward itself, but to the pursuit of it. In relationships, especially those marked by emotional inconsistency, intermittent reinforcement can be particularly damaging. A person may receive a warm, loving message one day, followed by days of silence or cold behavior. This creates a powerful emotional tension. The person on the receiving end begins to crave those rare moments of affection and approval, even though they come at the cost of prolonged emotional neglect. The occasional attention feels more meaningful precisely because it is rare. Instead of seeing the inconsistency as a red flag, the person interprets the sporadic rewards as evidence that love still exists, and if they just try harder or wait longer, that love will return in full. This is the same principle used in gambling. Slot machines do not pay out consistently. Instead, they are programmed to offer occasional wins at unpredictable intervals. The randomness keeps players pulling the lever, hoping the next spin will bring the jackpot. Over time, the act of gambling itself becomes addictive, not just the reward, but the possibility of reward. The brain releases dopamine, not only when a reward is received, but even when it anticipates a reward. In the context of an emotionally inconsistent relationship, the anticipation of affection or validation becomes intoxicating. Every small sign of interest, a text, a compliment, a brief show of attention, releases a burst of dopamine. It reinforces the idea that love is still possible, that hope is not lost, and so the person continues to invest, hoping for a return that may never come. What makes intermittent reinforcement particularly harmful is that it leads to overcommitment. The more unpredictable the reward, the more effort people tend to put into trying to secure it. It creates a sense of challenge and personal failure. Instead of seeing the lack of consistent affection as the other person's emotional limitation, the individual often internalizes the inconsistency as their own inadequacy. They believe if they were smarter, prettier, more loving, or more patient, the other person would respond differently. And so, they keep giving more, accepting less, and tolerating behavior that, in a consistently negative or consistently positive environment, they would never accept. Intermittent reinforcement blurs the line between pleasure and pain. Because the occasional highs feel so good, they create a distorted view of the relationship. The painful moments are minimized or rationalized in light of the rare good ones. This cognitive dissonance keeps people stuck. They remember the good times and convince themselves that the bad times are temporary anomalies, or somehow their fault. And in that mindset, leaving becomes nearly impossible. The fear of missing out on the next high, the next moment of connection, becomes stronger than the desire for stability or self-respect. Over time, this dynamic erodes self-esteem and emotional clarity. The person begins to question their worth, their standards, and even their reality. They may become anxious, obsessive, or depressed, all while clinging to the hope that things will change. But intermittent reinforcement doesn't just create emotional confusion, it creates dependency. It binds the person not to love, but to the chase, the uncertainty, and the emotional chaos. And breaking free from it often requires not just emotional strength, but a conscious effort to rewire the mind and reclaim a sense of stability and self-worth. The more she invests in a man who devalues her, the less he respects her, not because she is unworthy, but because her willingness to overextend herself in the face of disrespect communicates something dangerous. That her standards are flexible, and her self-worth is negotiable. In relationships, people unconsciously teach others how to treat them. Every time she forgives blatant disregard without requiring accountability, every time she justifies his emotional neglect or makes excuses for his inconsistent behavior, she reinforces the idea that he can offer the bare minimum and still be rewarded with her loyalty, affection, and time. Over time, this imbalance becomes not just tolerated, but expected. Men who are emotionally immature or self-serving often test boundaries without even realizing it. They notice what behaviors trigger confrontation and what slips by unnoticed. When a woman continuously tolerates being sidelined, ignored, or devalued, the man may not consciously think, "I'm losing respect for her," but emotionally, he starts to see her as someone who can be controlled, someone who won't walk away no matter how poorly she's treated. And with that belief, genuine respect begins to erode. Because respect isn't just about admiration, it's about perceived strength. And in a dynamic where one person gives endlessly while the other gives sparingly, the power dynamic becomes skewed. Many women fall into this trap not because they lack self-worth, but because they believe love can fix things. They believe that if they show more patience, more compassion, and more loyalty, eventually he will recognize their value and rise to meet them. They think their consistency will inspire his commitment. But this rarely happens. Instead, the man begins to take her for granted. He stops making effort, stops appreciating her gestures, and even starts seeing her availability as weakness. The more she shows up for him while he's emotionally absent, the more he assumes she needs him more than he needs her. And when one person in a relationship feels they are being chased while offering very little in return, attraction begins to fade. The tragedy of this dynamic is that the more she invests emotionally, the more she believes she cannot leave. She tells herself that she's already come this far, already poured so much into the relationship, that walking away now would make it all feel like a waste. This is known as the sunk cost fallacy, where past investment makes someone hold on to something they know is failing, simply because they've given too much to let go. But the more she stays, the more invisible she becomes in his eyes. Her emotional generosity becomes expected, not appreciated. Her forgiveness becomes a free pass for bad behavior. Her loyalty turns into silence, and silence turns into complicity. Men who devalue women do not magically learn to value them simply because the woman stayed long enough. In fact, the longer she stays without demanding more, the deeper the message sinks in that she doesn't believe she deserves more. And that is the belief he begins to mirror back to her. He may not say it out loud, but his actions scream it, "I don't have to change. You'll always be here." And once that belief is internalized by him, the relationship shifts from connection to control. What many women don't realize is that love without boundaries isn't love, it's self-abandonment. Giving more to someone who is giving you less isn't noble, it's destructive. And the more you try to earn love from someone who doesn't respect you, the more you lose respect for yourself. Respect isn't something that can be begged for or bought through sacrifice. It is established through self-honoring behavior. When she begins to value herself enough to stop overgiving and start requiring reciprocity, the dynamic changes. Not because he changes, but because she does. And that shift, quiet but powerful, is often the beginning of freedom. Healing begins when a woman stops seeing his rejection as proof of her unworthiness and starts recognizing it as a reflection of his limitations, not her value. Too often, when a man pulls away, becomes distant, or outright rejects her, a woman internalizes that experience as evidence that she is not enough. She replays every conversation, second-guesses every action, and begins to believe that if she had done something differently, looked better, spoken softer, been less emotional, he would have stayed. But that mindset chains her worth to his perception, placing the power of her identity in someone who may never have truly seen her. When a woman sees herself through the lens of a man who rejected her, she begins to abandon herself. She no longer views her traits, her heart, or her presence as sacred. Instead, she scrutinizes every part of herself through a distorted mirror, one shaped by someone who didn't know how to value her. This creates a cycle of self-blame and insecurity that is both exhausting and disempowering. But rejection, when looked at from a different perspective, can be revealing. It often says more about the other person's readiness, emotional availability, and capacity to receive love than it does about the woman who offered it. A man who cannot meet her emotional needs, who cannot recognize the beauty in her vulnerability or the strength in her loyalty, is not necessarily rejecting her, he's rejecting the intimacy and responsibility that comes with real connection. Real healing begins when she starts to see this distinction clearly. It begins when she stops asking, "What's wrong with me?" and starts asking, "Why did I give so much to someone who gave so little?" That shift in focus turns the pain of rejection into a path toward self-discovery. It forces her to confront the parts of herself that sought validation in his attention, to examine why his approval became the currency of her self-worth. When she realizes that no external validation can fill the internal void left by unresolved wounds, she begins the process of reclaiming her identity. She starts to understand that being left by someone doesn't make her unlovable. It simply means that person wasn't capable of giving love in the way she deserved. This realization is not easy. It requires her to mourn not just the man, but the story she told herself about what he meant. It means letting go of the fantasy that he would eventually change, come back, or see her clearly. But in letting go of that illusion, she makes room for something far more powerful, clarity. She begins to rebuild her self-worth on a foundation that isn't dependent on someone else's treatment of her. She starts to nurture the parts of herself she once sacrificed just to keep his interest. She no longer needs to be chosen to feel valuable. She chooses herself. Healing deepens when she starts setting boundaries not to punish others, but to protect herself. She stops giving access to people who respond to her love with apathy. She stops chasing people who run at the first sign of emotional depth. She no longer romanticizes the idea of being the exception to someone's emotional unavailability. Instead, she honors herself by only engaging with those who meet her with the same presence and intentionality she offers. When a woman reaches this point, rejection no longer devastates her, it redirects her. She sees it not as a measure of her desirability, but as a divine filtering system removing what was never aligned with her true worth. And from that place, she doesn't just heal, she transforms. Because once she stops tying her value to someone else's acceptance, she becomes free. Free to love without losing herself. Free to walk away without guilt. And most of all, free to be exactly who she is, without apology or fear. True freedom comes when she chooses herself over being chosen. It's the moment she no longer waits for a man's text to validate her beauty, his commitment to confirm her worth, or his attention to prove she is lovable. Choosing herself means she stops handing over the power of her identity to someone else's indecision or inability to see her clearly. It is the quiet but powerful decision to turn inward, to meet her own needs, and to honor the voice inside that's been whispering all along, "You are enough." Not because someone else said so, but because she knows so. For so long, many women are taught that their value lies in being wanted, desired, or picked. Society praises the woman who gets the guy, who keeps the guy, who sacrifices everything to maintain a relationship, no matter how hollow or imbalanced it may be. She learns that being chosen is the prize, the proof that she has done something right. So she gives. She molds. She shrinks. She waits. All in the hope that someone will look at her and say, "You. I choose you." But what happens when he doesn't? When he loves half-heartedly, or not at all? When his attention comes in waves and his affection has conditions? That's where the real crisis begins, not because she lost him, but because she lost herself trying to keep him. But freedom, true freedom, begins the moment she stops living in that prison of external approval. It begins when she realizes that love that demands she abandon her needs is not love, it's control. That a relationship that thrives only when she is silent, agreeable, or endlessly accommodating is not a relationship, it's emotional servitude. Choosing herself means drawing a line between compromise and self-sacrifice. It means asking not, how can I be what he wants, but what do I want, and does he meet me there? When she chooses herself, she no longer views being single as a problem to fix, but a space to grow. She stops seeing solitude as loneliness and starts seeing it as clarity. The noise fades. The desperation dissolves. And what's left is her, unfiltered, unapologetic, and whole. She doesn't need to perform for love. She doesn't need to earn rest, softness, or safety. She grants it to herself. She stops auditioning for roles in men's lives and starts writing the script of her own. It doesn't mean she won't love again. On the contrary, when she chooses herself first, she becomes capable of deeper love than ever before. Not love born from need, but from overflow. She won't settle for breadcrumbs because she's already full. She won't chase emotionally unavailable men because she's no longer addicted to struggle. She won't beg to be seen because she sees herself so clearly. The man who enters her life will not be her source of happiness, he will be a mirror of it. And if he cannot meet her with the same level of presence, respect, and intentionality, she won't lose sleep over it. Not because she's bitter, but because she's grounded. She knows that love is not about convincing someone to stay, it's about showing up as your full self and watching who stands beside you, not who runs away. She no longer fears rejection, because she knows rejection from the wrong person is protection. She no longer fears being alone, because she's found peace in her own company. Choosing herself over being chosen doesn't mean she closes her heart, it means she guards it with wisdom. It means she loves from a place of strength, not scarcity. And in doing so, she breaks the cycle. She stops waiting to be crowned by someone else and wears her own crown with pride. Because she finally understands, the most powerful choice she will ever make is the one where she chooses herself, fully, fiercely, and without hesitation. In the end, the obsession over men who don't value you is not about them at all, it's about the story you're telling yourself. It's about the belief that you need to earn love, to prove your worth, to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be. But true love, real respect, begins when you realize that you don't need to chase after anyone to prove that you are worthy of love. You are worthy of it just by being yourself. You don't have to give more, do more, or be more to earn someone's attention. You are enough, exactly as you are. And once you realize that, once you embrace your own worth without needing validation from someone who can't see it, that's when everything shifts. You stop accepting the bare minimum, and you start demanding what you deserve. You don't need anyone to choose you, because you have already chosen yourself. And when you do that, you'll begin to attract the love, respect, and partnership that mirrors your true value. Remember, the greatest love story you'll ever live is the one where you choose yourself first. And when you do, you'll find that everything else falls into place.